All right.
Now, good morning from Chicago. Today we're be doing a case of persistent atrial fibrillation and demonstrating our approach with rotor mapping. Want to briefly give you some notes of the case, if you will. You can show the next slide. So this is a 54-year-old man that had persistent fib for 7 months, symptomatic with the typical comorbidities of hypertension, diabetes, obesity, and sleep apnea. He had an ejection fraction of 45%, non-obstructive coronary disease. He had had a trial of defetelide, but remained inside a week after cardioversion, and so currently is on rate control medicine and a apixaban. If we go forward now, you take the slides off. You can see, I'll bring on the screen. So you can see now a RAO projection and a superior view of the left atrium. This has been an instruction. The left atrial volume, I'll show you more things. Let's go back to the slide. You can see that this is his MRI. Right atrial volume of 150 cc's, atrial volume of 166 cc's, and a fibrosis scan related, so a fibrosis score of about 6%. We can go back to the main screen again. So this is a 60 basket we put into the left atrium, 60 lengths. As you can see, and we can show a flow briefly. That the basket fits very well, so LAO view as well. And okay, that's fine. And you can see the basket now. And it's a little bit of coverage, if you will, of the most inferior portion of the wall, but otherwise looks great. This is our first, if I'll go to the, back to the main screen. And it's you on the upper left, and let me make sure I've got the right pointer. We've actually looked, this is the first position, it's a 1-minute acquisition. This is a 4th segment. And while we were waiting, we screened through a few of these. And as you can see, there's a rotational activity that's most predominant down there. I think you can see the arrow there. And on the grid, this projects as GH76. So that's what we're going to want to look at and find the corresponding area on cargo. So 87, so those ports correspond to 6677, 8687. And so we're just going to define those boundaries. Typical areas are around 2 to 3 centimeters squared. Okay, if you want to take. So what we're going to do now is go ahead and proceed with applying ablation within that area around the rotational that we've identified on the first map in the left atrium.
David, I just want to interrupt for a second to make sure we're all following. So this is a patient with persistent atrial fibrillation, and we saw the delayed gadolinium enhancement MRI showing about 15% fibrosis. And then you put a basket or multipolar catheter in the left atrium. You acquired an activation map where we're showing on the left upper screen, showing an area of rotational activity on the anterior wall, which you surrounded with that white marker, and now you're going to ablate it. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right.
So we're in the process of doing that now.
Dave, do you want to just talk about your strategy in ablating these regions? Are you gonna fill that little square with red dots, or do you try to bring it to a structure?
Yes. So typically what we would do, and we can talk about this a bit more tomorrow, typically what we do is you could start with mapping in either the left atrium or the right atrium. We thought for today our strategy is actually to do right atrium first, then left atrium. We'd start with the left atrium today, so you can at least give you an opportunity to see the definition of a few rotors. So our goal is to, and in this case, what we'll do is map until we can no longer get rotational activity identified in the left atrium on repeated mapping. So once we're done with this, we'll take another acquisition to look at that rotation in this area has been eliminated, and that we can subsequently identify any new rotors.
David, any relationship
We would do rotor mapping prior. Our initial was to do all of the rotational mapping in atrial fifth before we do pulmonary vein isolation.
David, was there any relationship between this area where the rotor is and the scar on the MRI? I don't remember how the MRI...
You can actually see, if you want to go back to this... he's giving RF there.
Yeah, I don't think we see the scar map.
There you go. So if you look at the REO,
yes,
the scar extends about halfway out, and what you see is this seems from the border of the scar.
okay.
If you go back and go halfway, I think I can get a pointer on this. And if you look, our rotor seems to be in this area here.
And is this a typical finding on the rotor locations? Do you find them around at the edge of the scar that you defined by MRI?
When we looked at the series of patients, that was the most common location. It was early in the center of the scar, but typically on the border. Our goal during the ablation in this is really just electrogram abatement, so that we and I will introduce my colleague Smith-Vestwala, who is doing the ablation right now. Hello. Go ahead.
Can I just ask, Pierre, using your ECGI mapping, when you find a similar, what you consider an AF source, how do you target that for ablation? What's your strategy?
A very good question, because it's still unclear in my mind. But what we would most often do is to kind of transect that with a kind of linear lesion. But it's really unclear what to do and what the best strategy is. What I can perhaps emphasize, and I was about to ask the question to David, in fact, is that the endpoint in our lab is definitely not to get the disappearance of all signal in this region, because this, with an ablation catheter, is quite difficult to achieve and means that you have a really large lesion so that you kill all the far-field activity that may pollute your signal. So we're not looking for that, but rather for a slowing of the local activity and also for the loss of the sharpest components. But that would be it. Yeah. Now, having said that, we did quite some cases with the NMARC catheter when it was still available, and that was very convenient, even though the lesions were not like lines, but we were just using 3 or 4 electrodes, semicircular lesions, was working very well as well.
So one additional question there is,
just interrupt for a minute.
you know, you said you went up with big lesions, but how much of a trajectory do you have with these that you have to deal with? You know, there may be a core, but then it moves, and are we talking about 4 centimeters of
Oh, no, it's
trajectory, or-
usually not as big. I would say that it's rather like 2-3 centimeters in most cases. It's probably not that big.
David, how many rotors you saw in this case?
Just to make very clear, our short-term goal is to electromagnetic, but the end point of the rotor, the mapping is to look at this rotational activity in this area. It's just a matter of making sure that we have to keep making multiple maps because we haven't completely eliminated. So what we'll do right now is we'll take another acquisition and take another map and see if that area has now been altered by the, and that is our end point for each of these.
So the map we're seeing now is a map that was acquired after?
This is the previous map, so we're acquiring the next map now.
Okay.
So we'll put that up in a minute.
Any questions from the audience about, yes, we have a question there. Can you hold on 1 second? Can you activate his mic, please?
Hello?
Yes.
Shouldn't the tachycardia terminate while he's ablating there?
Should he do what?
Shouldn't the tachycardia terminate? If he's finding a rotor and ablating in that area, shouldn't the AFib terminate?
Oh, so the question is, should AFib terminate? So, Dave, the question is, I don't know if you heard it, do you expect AFib to terminate when you ablate the rotational areas?
Yeah, most patients have several, so wouldn't necessarily, our termination rate goal is about 8%, but for persistent atrial fibrillation, it's around 40%. But after the completion of all rotational activity, and that can involve up to somewhere between 4 and 8 sites. So that's an interesting finding, and it helps you understand that there's some connection between what you're eating and that's the maintenance of atrial fibrillation. But as we'll talk about tomorrow, termination is an endpoint, and if we do terminate, we'll try to reinitiate in order to identify potential other sites of rotational activity. And our experience, and I think in the experience of several others, that termination in and of itself does not correlate with long-term outcomes. And I'll show you some of our data tomorrow for that.
Thank you.
So
Doug?
again, the end point is elimination of rotational activity. If determination, it's an interesting finding, and we noted, but then we try to reintroduce it and continue to map.
Thank you, David. David will take a couple of questions from the panel and the audience, and you will let us know, please, when you have your post-ablation map acquired.
It's coming up in just seconds here.
Dave, my question is, have you found the RAP information to be very helpful? You've not shown us that.
I think it was actually up there on the previous map, but I'll show it again. We're processing now the new map, and I'll show you that in 1 minute.
Okay.
Dave, you probably mentioned, and I couldn't hear, but the duration and the power settings for this energy application in this region?
Yeah, 35, we do a 35 watt and at least 30 seconds at each site. And using the contact force, you can see that's up in the corner of the cardo map.
And what size?
Dead air here,
So what size area are you planning to cover based on the information from the rotational activity that you observed? Is it about half a centimeter by a centimeter?
Yeah, this is about, our average is typically for that. Sometimes this is actually determined by a number of recording points, and it's about 64 electrodes, and it's in a, in a confined atrial size. So the typical area to be somewhere between 2 to 4 centimeters squared at around 3. So that's the average size overall. We can, if you want, Brian, if you want to just measure that size, quick area for you what this is exactly.
Yeah, so the question is, how much do you do before you remap to see the effect?
This is what we do. So we're going to remap right now. So we make sure that we cut out the lines of that particular area is about 2.2 centimeters.
Okay, thank you.
So again, our short term is trying to get as much voltage abate as possible inside that zone and then rarely we'll still see rotational activity in that area, which means we either have to revisit the site and there still may be viable tissue or we'll have to enlarge it somewhat.
Is there a question?
There's a question back there.
If we take a patient with persistent atrial fibrillation and we cardioverse the patient and reinduce atrial fibrillation, are these rotors in the same place or they move around with different episodes of AFib?
Well, in any given patient, there may be several areas of rotational activity. There may be a hierarchy, as you see here, and you'll see as we go through this, there may be 2 or 3 more areas in the left atrium that support rotationality in a relatively small space. So the answer is, yes, there's reproducibility, but there are typically more than one site. That makes the question a little more complicated. So you may see one site presenting at one time and a different one another time.
So while we're waiting for this map, so we saw, 3 approaches this morning for persistent AFib. We saw the non-contact mapping from Prague. We're seeing now a rotor mapping from Chicago. We saw fibrosis ablation. Can we go over the panels and you can tell us briefly what do you do in your labs for in persistent AFib patients? Again, like maybe a minute or so or less per person. Andrea?
You're going to be seeing the map come up here for right now. And this is the area that we previously ablated. And we're not seeing complete rotation here anymore. Doug asked, I believe, about the wrap. Turn that on. So we're not seeing, there was wrap down here on the initial map that when I'm sorry if I didn't make that more clear what was there. This confirms what we're seeing, that there isn't much more rotation in this area, that everything is incomplete rather than full rotations. There does seem to be another area that appears to have a consistent rotation. And the wrap is sometimes you don't feel like you always see the center of it, so we use this as with some interpretation, if you will. And Doug referred to this as wrap means rotation-like profile, and it's correlated with the sort of centers of the rotors over the 4-second period. What we do now, you can see that this is pretty consistent. It's in the area of where the center is. You can see my if I'm moving it there against the white. So it's 3 3 and the letter E here is the predominant, as you can see here, thing. And so that's where we're going to go, that area. Take a look at another segment here. Another 4-second segment of that was taken. And this is the area we're looking at again and you don't quite as strongly in this second, on this particular 4-second epic. So we're going to look at one more.
So David, just to make sure we understand this, you showed us a post-ablation map which did not show the rotational activity anymore, and now you're showing
At
us...
the site where we were looking, then there was another suggestion at E3, and we're looking to make sure that that's reproducible, at least several segments. It was stronger on the first segment than on the second. We're now going to look at another one.
Okay,
And I'm just moving 1-minute segment.
okay.
We're going to look at another 4-second one. The idea is, in other words, that we want reproducibility.
David, have you done the mapping and ablation in the right atrium already, or you don't?
Excuse me?
Have you done the map?
We decided for this presentation to start in the left atrium. Thought that everyone would be a little bit more familiar with the anatomy, and then we'll go the right atrium after this.
Okay,
Now, this appears.
there's a question from Andrea.
No, I was asking if he has done already mapping and ablation in the right atrium before going to the left, or he hasn't.
No, initial protocol is always starting in the right atrium. For the purposes of this presentation, just to show you how the basket fits in the left atrium and that sort of thing, we get to start with the left atrium here. Is it critical for me to start with? I think we talked about that. Now this is a little stronger area. We still have this area, which is, again, we applied E3, but we're not seeing it as reproducible. But we see something that looks relatively much better up here in AB5.
So, David, what's your plan for the remaining of this case?
Global plan? I'm not sure what you're asking. Our short term is we're going to finish mapping and ablating rotational activity in the left atrium, go back to the right atrium, and then do pulmonary vein ablation at the end.
Okay. And if the patient obviously is in AFib, you will do cardioversion and then check all the veins and all that.
At the end of the procedure, if the patient has terminated, we will then cardiovert and make sure that he has persistent pulmonary vein isolation.
Okay. Thank you, David. It's a very nice case. Any questions from the audience members, or from the audience or the panel members before we move to the next?
So we're going to do, right, so this looks to be the strongest on multiple maps is E4-5. So 14, 15. And 24, 25 is in the roof. All right. So we can go ahead and, Pete Smith? Yeah. Any questions or identification of this area?
So this is another area of rotational activity you identified on the roof?
Right. So this
Okay.
is now the rotation in the lower part of the atrial septum is gone. There appears to be at least 2 of the 3 segments, there was rotational activity area.
You have a question?
Yes, I have a question.
So if you want to go back again and look at the map for this one, if you get back to the,
It's not at all
Yeah,
clear
the-
to me how you identify these areas of rotation. I'm trying my best to blur my eyes and try to see rotation. Are there any tools that help you to identify this more automated?
yeah, so I think, can you see this colored tip here with the pointing to?
Yeah.
So that's been a tool that identifies both the number of patients and the curvature. That's to help identify areas of rotational activity. And I think while it's helpful, it draws your attention to, again, we look at the activity of the singlet as well, which this takes into account. So you're looking at activity in the 4 electrodes immediately next to this area, and also then a link to looking at a larger set of electrodes around that.
So David, we're ready to wrap up. Is there anything you would like to show us or say before we leave?
No, I think we're going to get again. The process is we'll take another acquisition after this is good, and if there's no more rotational activity, we'll move to the right atrium.
Thank you very much, David. Very nice case.